Hello and welcome back, and today we want to continue looking at the performance of WD Red hard drives. We're looking at the difference between the DMSMR or Drive Managed Single Magnetic Recording drives and how they compare with the CMR or Conventional Magnetic Recording WD Red hard drives. For those that aren't aware, WD got into a little bit of muddy water earlier in 2020 and indeed towards the end of 2019 over the idea that a lot of their drives featured single magnetic recording, something typically not recommended for a lot of NAS systems, and they had it on their NAS drives, although it wasn't detailed on the datasheets. Now, we have covered this in numerous other videos prior to this, along with starting our performance benchmarks of the AX series of drives, or drives in 2 to 6 TB that featured SMR. And we are comparing them currently against the WD Red Plus series. This is the lower capacity drives that have got CMR inside. The price is near enough identical no matter where you look, but WD Red and WD Red Plus are floating around, and we've been looking at the difference between these drives on different systems. We were looking at already RAID 5 build times, RAID 5 rebuild times, drive fill times, and we've done some AJA and Blackmagic tests on single drives. Today is the turn of the RAID 5 test. So what we're doing today is we've connected to this Synology NAS system via 10 GBE. This is a 10 GBE equipped NAS in the DS1621XS Plus. It's Xeon powered as well with plenty of memory. We've got the 10 GBE port connected, and we're connected to it on this laptop here. This laptop utilizing an NVMe SSD inside. Let's go into the specs in a little bit more detail there. Go into the system properties. This is an i7 6-core system with 32 gig of memory, and it is running on a Samsung 970 Pro 1TB SSD inside. So there's no performance bottlenecks inside. We've even got GPU enabled NAS, and we're utilizing a solo 10G Thunderbolt 3 to 10G adapter. We can find out a little bit more information about it. So the status will give us that it's a 10G drive. And if we go into the specifications in a little bit more detail and go to the configuration, we can go into jumbo frames, and you can see that we have enabled it at 9000. And indeed, on the Synology NAS itself, we've opened it up to the 9000 on the MTU2. So we've removed all of the bottlenecks. Today we're going to be utilizing AJA, Blackmagic, and some file transfers. And to do that, we're going to be using mapped network drives. I've not mapped them yet, so let's go ahead and map them. Here you can see that NAS appearing twice, one on 1 GBE connection here, and the 10 GBE connection here. We're going to right click, we're going to map the drive, we're going to log in. Now, I'm assuming a lot of you guys have watched the other videos, so you know about the volume 1 here and volume 2 here. We've already created the shared folders on the system. So the first drive we're going to do is the SMR. We're going to add that now. Add that to S for the SMR. That's what the shared drive is going to be called. And if we open it up, we can go back. And as you can see, now, drive S is that SMR drive that we filled to 80% capacity, a little bit higher from those original tests. So next we're going to enable the other shared folder, and this is going to be our CMR or WD Red Plus series. We're going to go in and make sure we log in properly. We could just reuse the credentials, but we're not going to do that. From there, we're going to log into the NAS. And then from here, we're going to use the CMR. We can't really put that under C for conventional because we're already using C. But we're going to be using P for perpendicular magnetic recording. So at least that's kind of the same. So just remember that the P drive is the one for the CMR drives. So now we've got our two shared folders converted into accessible mapped network drives on our system. We can then move into the first stage of today's testing. We're going to come out of that, and we're going to leave the Synology on in the background, but what we'll also do is just have the performance monitor nice and big so we can monitor that throughout the course of these tests. Right, so I've done a quick rejig of the layout of the screen here so we can make sure we can fit as much of this in as possible. And yes, we are going to be running these tests simultaneously. This is a Xeon powered NAS, so it's got more than enough throughput for that. And we are using 10 GBE, so there'll be no throttling with these drives. So As you can see from both of these, we're going to be running these at read-write test with disk caching disabled, and it's going to be a single file test running continuously. We've got the performance charts there at the bottom, and on the left hand side we've got the SMR, otherwise known as the WD Red, and on the right hand side we have got the CMR or WD Red Plus series drives. We're doing a 1 gig test file test first in AJA, and this is a 1080p test file, and also if you can just make it out at the top, we do have the Synology doing performances there. So if we play these files and get these testing, we're going to see some differences between them, and automatically we're already seeing a big difference, despite the fact that the SMR volume started, I don't know, not even 2 seconds before the CMR volume. It is completing the 1 gig test file transmissions a great deal faster. Also, the read and writes seem relatively close, but closer inspection to the bottom of the screen, you'll notice down here at the bottom with the performance disk read and write charts that the write speeds here are just typically higher early doors on the testing utilizing those SMR drives. We've still got plenty of throughput happening here, and while that test is running, we can of course open up the task manager on this PC system and go to the performance there and have a look at the network bandwidth, and we're going to be able to see that on that the connection that we have running there in the background, that we're seeing just normal performance on that Ethernet there. We're able to see all of the transmission happening in real time via that solo adapter, and we can see that we're hitting that 10 gigabits there between them. Now, I don't believe that we are throttling this connection because we've still not hit 1000 megs here between them. And if we go back to the NAS very quickly, we can have a look at those system resources, flicking back to this very quickly and zoom in. We're able to see the volume 2, the CMR, is certainly the lower of the two overall. We're seeing that refresh, that jump in between them as the test flicks between them, but overall the numbers are still lower on those CMR drives, and a lot of that is to do with that disk caching there in the background. So let's flick back to AJA running there in the background, and again bear in mind that although these numbers running on the screen seem comparatively similar at times, it's worth highlighting that both of these tests are now out of sync. The left test is running faster, and it's several sequences faster than that of the CMR series. So let's stop these tests here. Next, we're going to move into a 16 gig test file. This is going to be an enormous test file, and what I think we're going to see during this test is it's going to peak very early, and then that speed, as time wears on with that 16 gigabyte test file, we're going to see that speed get lower and lower and lower, probably as low as the 200 megs at one point. But bear in mind, I'm going to try and start these off at the same time as close as possible. Let's start the test. 3, 2, 1. And we're seeing that speed from both of these in real time performing that 16 gig test file there. Now, we're already seeing them both take the hit dealing with this 16 gig, but you can see that disparity between them. There was around less than a second there difference between the starting of both of these tests, and you can ignore the read value right now because the read value is from the previous testing that was done earlier on, but both of them are starting to gutterball down. The CMR drive there is certainly lower, and it seems to be sitting at that 220 for quite a while, and the SMR series on the left hand side of the screen is holding on to the extra little bit there in the 230 for as long as possible. But the beautiful thing about larger scale testing like this 16 gig test file is we're able to see larger spanned results. So 1 gig test file on a Xeon using multiple drives in a 10G, that test is over and done with too quick to get real results. And right here, I think you can see that disparity, not only because the speed is higher on the SMR on the left hand side of the screen, but also because it completed that test noticeably quicker. Despite that less than a second difference between them, there was a clear 5 or 6 seconds difference between these two in completing the write operation. Now, if we look at the bottom of the screen while the read test is being completed, we're able to see there that the write speed on the CMR was far more consistent. Now, there are arguments for that. There's the fact that there was that slight difference in time between them. And if we look at the overall performance, the performance of the SMR on the left-hand side of the screen was higher in terms of write throughout. However, right now in read, we're seeing a lot more even-handed nature of the data transmission here. We're seeing both of them sit at the 160s, late 150s in the case of the SMR, which is still maintaining the tiniest lead, but that lead is slowly getting eaten up in this AJA test. Obviously, after this, we're going to be running our Black Magic speed test on these two drives. But right now, I think both of these drives in terms of read are remarkably similar, which surprised me a bit with the increased cache. Now, I don't know if you guys caught the RAID performance testing in my previous video, but it was quite surprising how much that additional cache on the WD Red carried it forward. But now the test runs to a close, we can see that that read speed is sitting there at the 163 eventual on the SMR, and on the CMR on the right hand side we sat at 166, and I think that is close enough for us not to criticize. Now what we're going to do is not go through the read again, but we're going to allow one more sequence of write, because now we're really saturating that network connection, and that RAID activity is going to be interesting to see what the results are this time, because right now we are seeing that max speed across both of them being far more comparable without that early doors advantage at the beginning there. Bear in mind, of course, we are utilizing 3 WD Red 3TB drives in a RAID 5, so really what we're seeing here is simply 3 drives being accessed in this RAID 5. If we were utilizing larger RAID arrays, then that 10G connection would have far more data to play with, but ultimately the bottleneck here is the drives themselves. The CPU in this NAS is perfectly fine at this, and the 10G connection bandwidth opens up things remarkably for us. But at the 16 gig test there, we're seeing far more even-handed results here overall, and the charts at the bottom are pretty clear this time around. So we're going to let those two end there. So I'm going to end the test on the left-hand side there. We're going to let the right-hand side, the CMR, finish, and we can have a look at those charts. And as we can see, typically we saw more consistent performance there on the CMR, as one would expect, rather than the dips that come to the performance of SMR. But overall, the performance between them is very, very comparable. So now we're going to move over to our Black Magic test. And the Black Magic test, you can see all of that network utilization there on the NAS. Now in Black Magic, we can't run 2 sessions side by side, unfortunately. But what we can do is run a big old 5 gig test file. Now 5 gig isn't quite 16 gig, but Black Magic is a different kind of beast. First, we're going to go for the drive managed SMR again. And we're going to go ahead and start that test. And we're going to see a peak that's going to go away. You can ignore the peak. That's quite normal to a RAID environment with 10G testing. Generally, you will find that that becomes kind of an annoying anomaly in testing like this, where the hardware environment is just too high spec. And I don't think we're going to get a reliable enough read here from Black Magic on these environments, because that cache is playing tricksy with the amount of throughput that the test with its regularly accessed data is putting through from Black Magic. Larger arrays might be more suitable to this, but nevertheless, we're going to let this run a couple more sequences in read and write here, utilizing the WD Red SMR shared drive that we're running on that storage pool. And then after that, we're just going to do a quick test there on the CMR series, although I'm not totally happy with these Black Magic results, and I'm not really going to rely on these too much overall. So we're going to let that read test there end, let it run out, but those performance numbers are just plain wrong there, and we don't have disk caching on in the background. So next we're going to move on to the CMR series, and again these are the WD Red Plus drives, and again this is a 5 gig test file. Let's run that test. And again, we're seeing even the peak early doors isn't the same, and the drop is far, far more dramatic. So even though we're not seeing these ridiculous heights, and I think we can ignore that read in a big, big way, the right there is certainly dropping to what it's supposed to be a great deal quicker here on the CMR. Now again, that is a lot of that to do with having a smaller cache to kind of play fake on our testing we're running here today over this 10G connection. But I think overall between those two drives, I'm happier with the CMR series. I'm disappointed with Blackmagic's reading here, and I might have to reanalyze the setup, but personally I'm not really seeing it. If we move it over ever so slightly, we've got those performance benchmarks happening there in the background with Synology's own system throughout this test, and we're able to see probably more reliable numbers overall happening on those volumes. But these are not averages, these are just live updates on those existing tests. So now we're just going to do a simple drag and drop test. We're going to go into the PC. We're going to open up first the DMSMR volume. As you see there, we've got some files already inside them. I'm going to go grab a big old bunch of files. These are some tests that we've been running during the week here. Let's see how big this data we've grabbed here is. This is 36 gig. So let's copy that. And we're just going to copy that 36 gig of data into this directory. So we're going to create a new directory. We're just going to call it WD Red Test. And we're simply going to copy those files in and see how Windows behaves here. As you see, we're getting those speeds there. We saw that early spike that we saw earlier, but now the speed is going to climb down. Now 36 gig is, you know, a relatively easy amount of data to be playing with here, but I will highlight that there is a lot of large 4K videos here. The Plex tests, for example, are fairly huge. With the Plex testing videos, some of them weighing in at between 8 and 12 gigabytes in size. So these are very, very dense files for the system to be playing with there. I'm going to carry on sending those over, but ultimately the performance we're seeing there has leapt up from 60 seconds all the way up to 4 minutes. But we are seeing speeds there on average in the 2s and 3s. We're seeing it occasionally dip into the 100s, but I do think we're seeing good speeds here. And what I'm going to do now is fast forward to the completion of this file transfer so we can repeat this same file transfer onto that of the WD Red Plus series. Right, so that transfer completed, and as we can see there, it took 3 minutes and 30 seconds exactly. There's the first file that was transferred there, and that is the newest file there. We can see they were transferred through all between them, so that's 3.5 minutes for that transfer. So now let's repeat the exact same test, this time utilizing the CMR series of drives there. So we'll come up with that one there, call this one WD Red Plus, and once again we're going to go ahead and transfer those files. Going to go ahead and paste and let it finish. While it does that, we'll keep an eye on the stats and we'll see from the oldest to the newest file how long it took to transfer these 36 gig of data. Remember, 3 minutes 30 seconds is what the last one took, so we want to beat that 3.5 minutes, and that number is going to jump around all over the place, but otherwise let's fast forward to the completion of this transfer. And so the transfer over Windows has been completed, and I'm pleased to say that the speed between them this time is actually quicker on the CMR series, that conventional magnetic recording. Upload there to the NAS was a noticeable degree shorter, around about just shy of 3 minutes there, so a good noticeable degree there, between 6 minutes past 6 seconds and 10 minutes there, versus 58 and 12 minutes there. So a lovely degree of difference between them, but still less than 3 minutes and still gave it the overall home field advantage. But this has been comparing Blackmagic, AJA and Windows file transfer on WD Red versus WD Red Plus. If we take anything from these series of drives, it's WD Red is still a decent enough drive for NAS, although it has to be said it did show tiring as one would expect from an SMR drive. once they were getting particularly full and when the drive was under simultaneous accessing of read and write at once. But that is sort of to be expected from a hard drive at the best of times. I personally recommend WD-Red Plus and CMR and PMR drives over that of SMR, but for those of you that have got WD-Red SMR drives in your system, I don't think it's the end of the road yet. Just make sure you've got those backups in place. Thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed this video. Click subscribe to learn more. I hope you found it helpful. I'm going to keep hold of these drives for maybe a week or two. So if you guys can think of tests I haven't done yet, just like last time we done videos like this, do let me know. It does really help. And otherwise, I will see you next time.